Very good afternoon. As was said, is that it is usually very tough to have a session straight after lunch, and lunch also, which is a heavy Indian lunch. So we're try and make the session lively so that it doesn't get people yawning and sleeping in the audience. We got about just over an hour to do it. So just like the previous session, I'm going to try and engage with the panelists here. It's a much bigger panel on stage than the previous one that I moderated. But I'll try and get the session going and then open it up to the floor for any Q&A that you may have. Again, the topic is a little bit different to the session that we had in the morning. It's how we're related to that. So where we left in the pre-lunch session, I'm going to actually pick it up from there and discuss what are the ingredients for an ideal shopping center. And the three constituents of the stakeholders that you have there are the retailer, the investor, and the developer. And for an ideal shopping center, the alignment of interest of all these three is hugely important. Because if they're not really aligned, I'm not so sure that you can have an ideal mall or a shopping center. Unfortunately, Amitabh and the team have been able to get a panel which represents all these stakeholders. So you've got investor, you've got developers, you've got retailers, and you've got sort of private equity who's invested, and how do they view at a shopping mall. So let me start, Alok, with you first. Private equity for the longest time has been pretty negative on the mall. They've been very positive on office development, but negative on the mall. And here we're talking that what's an ideal mall, and their private equity has not been that excited to get into the malls. What's the reason for private equity not getting that excited?
So if you look at experience of all private equity players, they have not made money in retail development, that too in India. In 2007, many funds from abroad, many Indian companies wanted to invest, and they thought they will make a portfolio of malls. And after 5 years, 7 years, what they have found is they are stuck up with either 1 or 2 malls, and they are not able to scale it up. I think there are 3 or 4 primary reasons because of which private equity players are negative. One thing is, it's slightly in reverse order, the exit opportunities are not there. For a FDI fund, exit opportunities do not exist. So for a fund who needs to exit before, he needs to plan his exit before he invests, those opportunities do not exist. So that's a big challenge. Second thing is the cost of financing is very high. A mall cannot support a cost of financing which is 16 to 17 to 18% plus. It needs to have a lower cost of financing in range of early teens. But unfortunately, because malls are considered to be a risky asset, banks are not willing to fund them, and if they fund, the cost of financing is high. So that again makes the viability low. Third thing is cost of land acquisition. Malls need to have land at cheaper or a lower cost. But unfortunately, as and when we talk about retail, the land prices go up, and developers or funds have to invest in a project where the land cost is high. That again impacts the viability. And fourth, an important point is it's a tough asset class. Not many people know how to construct a good mall, how to design a good mall, and how to operate a good mall. So I think these are 4 issues which really make it investing in a mall very, very challenging.
Yeah, and this is again in line with what we discussed in the previous session, Alok, that land and financing and operations are very cumbersome, as a result of which the private equity hasn't really invested, and those who invested have not had a great experience, and are also struggling to find an exit from those malls. Joanna, you also represent private equity, and if you were to be given a choice, and private equity had, say, $100 million, would you go and invest in residential or commercial or retail?
Well, to be honest, as a domestic investor, with the Bennett Group, we look for two types of investments. One, which is residential investments that give you a high IRR but a low multiple, a low exit multiple, because it's a quick in and out investment. And two, commercial investments, which could be office as well as retail, which basically generate a lower IRR but give you a higher exit multiple because, for longer holding period. So as an institutional and as an investor, we look maybe for a 18 to 20% IRR, on a residential investment with a 1.5x multiple. On a commercial investment, we look at a lower IRR, which is a 15 to 18% with a 2.5x multiple. And that's the way we'd ideally look at it. So if I had $100 million, yes, I'd put it, if you ask me, about about 50% into commercial office space, 30% into residential, and the balance 20% now, looking at the way, now that we understand the way shopping centers function, and we've seen more than a 10-year evolution of good shopping centers versus bad, versus non-profitable versus profitable, I wouldn't mind investing some kind of money into shopping centers.
So that is positive that there is some thought of investing into retail real estate.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think in today's day and age, everyone's seen the lifestyle of a shopping center and the life cycle of a shopping center. You know which ones are going to make sense in the long run. You know which ones are going to, there's just no hope. If it's the right mix of debt and equity, you know what the exit multiple is going to be like. So I think all of the parameters are in place. We now just need to put it all together, and the right kind of investor needs to invest in it, and I'm sure there's money to be made.
So Alok, I'm sure once you get off the stage after the session, there'll be a lot of people in here who are going to come up to you and Joanna, and they're going to ask you are you going to invest your fund into their mall? What would your answer be to them?
So I have invested in two malls. One mall we bought was in Rajkot. It was a fully leased out mall. We were getting about 13 to 14% yield about 5 years back. Today the yield is down to 4%. And why we are able to exit is because the land prices have gone up. So we are able to, and somebody is buying, he is going to demolish the mall, do a residential development, and we are able to make money on the land, not on the mall. So that's an example. And the mall we invested, it took 5 years to construct, whereas we have tied up with a US-based developer who specializes in mall construction. Retailers gave us a tough time. They entered when the mall was announced. Most of them have exited by the time mall has opened. I mean, there's a full churn has happened. So I think these two examples should answer, what is a view I have.
Which means don't come near Alok when he gets off the stage.
I think this explains my experience of investing in malls.
Yeah. Rajat, I'm going to come to you, with that experience of private equity. Before we go to the developers, we heard that investors are not very keen to invest into large-scale retail developments because it's unpredictable as an asset class. Going forward, do you think that retail real estate for the retailers is going to become a big challenge?
I'm not sure, because what's happening is that maybe there are too many options available for retailers. And I'm talking about I'm not even talking about the anchor stores. I represent the small retailers, the guys who come in the last, So we look at a lot of people asking us to come and be in the malls, but over time we've discovered that there's some very, very important things you have to keep in mind when you look at space, especially when you're a small guy and you don't have too much money to waste. So we've opened stores, we've shut stores, we've done all those churn, and now we look at, one is who's managing the mall, and how involved are the people running the mall, and that's become a very important criteria for us.
And so what would be the top three things that mall developers should keep in mind from a retailer's perspective?
See, what we've discovered is if I would take you to any mall, with your eyes closed and put you inside the mall, almost 80% of malls are similar in terms of the mix that they have. So we look at guys who are also willing to experiment and get in different kind of people into the mall, so that there is a little bit of extra flavor, because finally you have your anchors there's 5 or 7 good anchors there. Then you have the Nike, Reebok, Adidas of the world. So there is a requirement for spaces which are smaller, which are more experimental, and we look at guys who are willing to do the experiment with us. So we look at those things right now.
Correct. Pushpa, just considering what was said by the private equity and by Rajat as a retailer, you represent the largest developer in the country, DLF, and who got a fair amount of appetite doing residential and offices, and and the retail malls. What would you define as an ideal mall? Yeah, when you look at the plain sheet of paper and saying from DLF's perspective that what is an ideal mall for you?
Thanks, Anuj. First of all, I think the ideal mall for DLF or for any developer in the country would be catchment specific. So the ideal mall really starts with the customer. Who's the customer we are talking about? Does that location really give us the opportunity to create a destination project? Does the location give us an opportunity to create a specialty project? The research before creating a mall is very important. And in DLF, this is something that we really do it intensely. And I must say that the other thing, the top 3 things for an ideal mall development would be, number 1 is integration with the urban development. I think we do not play enough importance to it, but the more we do it, for example, in Mall of India, Noida today, we are creating a 2 million per square feet project. It is the largest in the country. We are investing resources, time, and really ensuring the fact that there's enough parking. There's great ingress, egress into the project. We are widening roads. We are creating an environment where people can come in with ease. So I think that's the first thing which we need to pay attention to. The second is that to create the right tenant mix and to create the right zoning plan which caters to that particular catchment. We do not pay enough attention to it so far. Zoning is always an afterthought. And Mall of India, we've actually zoned the project first and then leased it. So we've got very, very clear agenda of who is this customer we are talking to. Each floor plate is large enough for that particular floor plate to be a mini mall in itself, and it is composite in itself. So I think we need to really go into creating destination projects wherein zones become mini malls and their ecosystem is self-sufficient. Third, very, very important thing is, of course, the right brands which will sustain itself in the long duration of the lease. Again, the brands, the kind of commercial arrangement that we do make with the brands should be of a long gestation nature, because we know that, as you know, we've all gone into the minimum guarantee revenue share mode. And so we are both really married in this relationship. It's no longer a scenario of a pure contract. So I think an ideal mall development is one in which the retailer and the developer are equally invested. And once these 3 are there, then yes, of course, the ideal mall is there. I must share with you one more thing. As a continuity to the earlier session that you were having, we were talking about the top 5 malls in the world. And DLF, I can tell you, is one developer who's got not just the vision, who's also really got the investment capability on one level, but also the involvement to create one of the top 5 malls in the world. And hopefully, we will be giving you that particular product. And I thought
that
there were
awesome.
25. In fact, there are 25 of us who are here representing from DLF. And the reason why we are doing that is because DLF as an organization is investing in manpower, is investing in really making sure that the manpower is developed, trained, and that's the first step towards creating a great product.
Thank you very much. I think, Pushpa, that's very, very nice opening comments. And I think the 3 pertinent points that you mentioned is the catchment, the zoning, and the partnership with the brands. If we were to just fast forward that, Mukesh, and come to you, you've been operating successful malls under the Infinity brand name. Tell us, what are the challenges? And your Infinity, to my mind, is an ideal mall. The size, the catchment, the zoning, the product, the brands. the reflection of partnership that you have in terms of the revenue sharing with those. So I think what will really benefit the audience is you've done the ideal mall. Now, what are the problems running that mall?
Let me start first. When we build the mall, we wanted to understand that what is the consumer in that catchment area, how much time is going to spend in that mall. That's the first thing. Are they just going to spend 2 hours in the mall, 3 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours? Based on that, we constructed a mall. The size of the mall was, it was a huge mall. We wanted to get the F&B right. We wanted to get the entertainment right and the zoning right. And build the entire infrastructure, right? From the parking to the safety and the security, the washrooms, the entry to the mall, exit to the mall. You want to make sure everything goes perfectly so that people coming to the mall, they find it easy to come to the mall. And then, of course, then they start shopping. As for the problems are concerned, the basic things still remain the same. That infrastructure around that mall is not all that good. We do have traffic problems there, at least during the weekends, in the evenings. People find it very difficult to get into the mall. And even if you have 1,000 car parking, we still find it a problem. Again, we are fortunate to have surrounding where people can park their cars. And if you're looking at from the retailer's point of view, there are some months which are not very good. We do have our own churning happening. And what we realize that this mall is basically more suited to the brands which are established in the country, whether it is a regional or national or international brands. And the brands which has not been recognized in the marketplace and consumers don't know much about it, I think they find it little tough. Marketing of the mall is not being a very difficult task because, again, the catchment was very good. The way it was launched, the way it has been established with the retailers, I don't think we really had a big problem in getting the right tenant and the right tenant mix. We have been able to maintain the mall pretty well. I think security-wise also has been pretty good. So I don't think we really see a big challenge. But there are issues in terms of infrastructure, not regarding the mall, I think the surrounding.
So you're saying is one of the challenges, the infrastructure, which is ingress and egress to the mall.
That's right, yes.
What are the other challenges other than that?
Otherwise, I think things have been pretty good. And even the quality of footfall, if you look at the quality of footfall, yeah, there are times when you get people coming to the mall, they may not be the right quality because they may not shop. But at the same time, I don't think really I could see this as a problem. It has been, only when you have crowd coming to the mall, they only bring in more crowd. I don't really think that's really a big challenge as such. So if in totality, I don't think we really have a problem. Again, if you look at the ROI, yes, that's a challenge. Because when you build such a large mall, you still are not able to really increase the rate the way you want the rate to go up. So that has really been a challenge.
Shilpa, you've advised a number of mall developers, new mall developers, those who have had experience doing mall developments. Where do you find that the mall developers don't listen to you? When you are convinced that this is the right point, and that's when they say, no, we're not going to implement what you are suggesting. Where do you think that they make the mistake?
So actually the answer goes back to your first question. What should be there in an ideal mall, or what is an ideal mall? So of course, both Pushpa and Mukesh have spoken at length about most of the characteristics and parameters by which we measure an ideal center. But essentially what we are trying to do and what needs to be there is that a center should always be relevant to the consumers. And it should not be relevant for 6 months or a year or 2 years, as many investors have burned their fingers, as the examples we heard in the beginning. But it needs to be relevant to them throughout its being. And for that, one of the most core, it needs to entertain them suitably all throughout. The center needs to continue to give them offerings in the price bracket that they are willing to spend. Not necessarily bring in offerings of tenants which are available and are looking to expand their stores. And I think that's a very big mismatch in this country, because all said and done, we have very handful of tenants in this country. And to fill up your malls, more often than not, you end up giving space to retailers whether or not they are relevant to the catchment. So the catchment may not be willing to spend 3,000 or 4,000 rupees for a t-shirt, but you end up putting a retailer there because that's what he's selling. And I think that's the big mismatch. The other big, and which actually brings us to the very big relevant issue of scale. So I really think that it's at no point should a developer, an investor, or a mall management should find themselves in a position where they're having to constantly deal with the challenge of keeping a mall filled up with successful retailers, not just in the first round, but throughout the course of their existence. And this is why most of the shopping centers, after the first few years, collapse, or rather, I should say underperform. I shouldn't say the word collapse. But, because initially, when we are trying to open a center, we like to achieve maximum occupancy. And over time, many retailers who are not relevant to begin with, they don't perform. Customers don't want to come and buy that merchandise. And then we start facing vacancy. And vacancy starts to become a very big killer in the entire business proposition. Your return on investment start coming down, and so on and so forth. And eventually we come to a point where we say, when Joanna sits and says that she only wants to spend 20% of her investment into retail. So yes, I think they need to continue to entertain the consumers, give them the food that they want to eat, give them the offerings, and never be too large in an ideal scenario. And many a mall developers actually stop seeing the relevance of the first two core fundamentals in the pre-operative phase of creation of a shopping center. One is that design is the biggest driver in this business across the world. And it's actually one of the most undervalued fields in our country. And not just for shopping centers, whether it is across product categories. We don't, even a wrapper of a ketchup that we buy in an airline, we get in an airline, when you open it, it often spills all over. So design is something which is a generic problem for, I think, across product categories. In architecture, in shopping center, retail planning and design, particularly so. And the second area is, as I said, tenant mix, because your focus is on, at some level, you do need to get your return, you do need to get the rentals kick in. So given the paucity of tenants, you're trying to fill it up with tenants who may not perform.
Nimesh, you represent the car parking, and we heard across the group that car parking is one of the factors which can lead to a success or failure of a mall. I can tell you invariably everybody sitting in this room will say, yes, we want more car parking. I don't think so anybody's going to say we don't want car parking, but that comes with a cost. And that also comes with physical challenges of putting up the car park, 2 basements, whatever, however you do that, and the timelines that go along with it is. How do you balance, the challenge with fully knowing that you want to put in that car park, but equally given the physical, constraints and the timelines and the cost that goes into it?
I think what has happened traditionally and which is changing, which I see now, that more and more developers who have traditionally looked at car parking as something, as a convenience to give to their customer, and therefore they have to put this asset in just to make it easier for the customer to come in and go out. Slowly they have realized that this is an asset class on its own within the mall. And there is a possibility to make this into a profit center rather than this just being a cost center for them. When they start looking at it that way, they are looking at creating innovative ways to ensure that the customer is drawn in, but they reward shoppers for shopping in their mall, but also the people who are coming in, as Mukesh had mentioned, there are many people who come into the mall, spend time in the mall, they don't necessarily shop. But you still generate some revenue and profitability from those kind of customers. But you can do this without it being a concept which is negative towards the customer, rather than rewarding in a positive fashion when they go and actually sell. So this is your touch point as a developer to your end customer. But not only does this asset give you the ability to touch this customer, but there is a lot of information which you can get from the customer based on the encatchment area, where they have shopped, based on validations, if the retailer is giving some kind of a validation, how much they've shopped, how much time they've spent in your mall environment. So there's a lot more information which you can use from a CRM standpoint and look to leverage this and not just look at it as a cost which you are going to incur.
A good point. Pushpa, just coming back to you, I asked Mukesh what are the concerns of operating a mall, and he listed those concerns. You're doing an ideal shopping mall. We know Mall of India. There is an intent to really do it at a global level. There is the financial wherewithal. There is all the expertise that you've got in there. Still, I'm sure there would be some problems that you faced during the phase of developing this mall. Again, the audience sitting in here who are looking to develop these malls, and they understand that they want to do an ideal mall, and for a minute we think that all of them are going to do an ideal mall. Tell us, what are the problems that they're going to face despite them going to go ahead and do an ideal mall?
I think the problems sometimes are localized in nature, but broadly, in terms of challenges, I think the largest challenge is internal in nature. It's very important for developers to integrate all their departments. When I joined DLF, the first thing that I found was everyone at that point in time were working in silos, wherein the design was not talking enough to leasing, leasing was not talking enough to marketing, marketing is not talking enough to operations. Well, we've changed all that. Which is why we are saying we're on the anvil of giving a global product. Because it's very important to understand that design is actually the cornerstone of an ideal shopping destination. I completely agree with Shilpa on that. And we have integrated these departments. There's a lot of cross-learning that we do. If the cross-learning doesn't happen, then the challenge starts right there. So it's internal in nature. External challenges, what we have done is, yes, we talk about integration as far as urban development is concerned, but that continues to be a challenge. We would ideally like to open the mall with a road which is directed and exclusively catering to the customers coming into the mall. Well, we are ensuring that it happens well before the mall opening, but we are keeping our fingers crossed, because really, sometimes these things are not in our control. The authorities move at their own pace, and that becomes a huge challenge. And the last challenge that I'd like to really say is that on an ongoing basis, again, when it comes to the authorities, the urban development, in Noida, we have a single window with the Noida Authority. And we find that, their outlook on how they see malls and what it value adds to the economy may not really be, as impactful as what we do bring to the table, which again brings back to the fact that if we get that industry status, then all these things could be taken care of. However, currently what we do have is any mall, be it DLF Mall of Promenade, Emporio, that complex gives around 4,000 employment to people, and that's not a mean number. DLF Mall of India will actually generate employment of around 6,000 to 8,000 people for outsourced employees, etc. Are we doing enough to, liaise with the authorities to ensure that these employees, their infrastructure is taken care of, their safety is taken care of, when they work during odd hours? Are we giving them enough in terms of their safety and security? These continue to remain challenges, and these operational issues is something that we at DLF are placing a lot of importance to, because we think those employees who are coming in, they're coming in, yes, to work with a particular parking management operator or with another operator who is outsourced, but he's coming into a DLF property. So the responsibility of ensuring the safety and security to not just the employees and further into the customers is a challenge, but it's a continuous challenge. It's one thing that we have started working on in close coordination with the authorities, and we hope that the authorities also, step up, add those many more CCTVs, create more lighting in and around the mall developments, and these are the challenges that continue to, take us.
Mukesh, before I move back to investors and retailers, one quick question from you. Did you face any challenges? Alok hinted towards to that part during the leasing stage before the mall got operational, and then opening of the mall.
Mm-hmm. I think fortunately what we had done, we had the OC in our hands. So before we started leasing the mall, we didn't really have.
Sorry. So you did the
We
mall,
had
you
taken
got
those-
the occupation certificate.
Then we
Well, you're
started.
unique then.
We didn't have a problem at all. Coming back to one of the issues what she was referring about the manpower, this has definitely been a challenge in Mumbai. Finding the people at the shop floor, you're talking about the housekeeping or security or maintenance, to find these people very, very difficult. And once you find them, to retain them is equally difficult. So that's a process, ongoing process of training people. That also can affect the mall services.
And Mukesh, just going back to the response that you provided, that you actually did the mall and secured the occupation certificate and then went out and leased it.
Right.
Wouldn't there not have been lots of alterations that you had to do to the structure? Because most of the anchor retailers may have had different design.
Not really. I think the way it was planned, the way the entire mall was structured in terms of the area, we didn't really have to make many changes because I think we were running a mall. We exactly knew the expectations of retailer, and I think we did consult them before building the mall. We had initial discussion with a lot of bigger retailers, with Future Group or Tata's. We understood the requirement, and accordingly, and the new brands coming in, we understood their requirement. We didn't really have to make many changes, maybe breaking one or two walls here and there, but I think it was by and large, we didn't have to make too many changes.
To make a point, I think both Pushpa and Mukesh pointed out a very interesting issue of manpower and how to facilitate their day-to-day lives with respect to the operations of the mall. I think one of the things, like in residential developments, just as additional FAR is given to create EWS housing to be able to accommodate the staff which is servicing that residence or even otherwise, you're given additional FAR. In the same way, maybe it's something which can be possibly explored, whether we can go back to the governments and as an industry and request. I mean, if you're creating employment for 7 to 10,000 people in a small microcosm, in a small catchment area, then maybe you can get additional FSI to create residential, and I'm sure that will be great news for all developers. And accommodate the core, at least 2,000
It's an
people
ideal
within
situation.
the
I
centers.
don't, one day it's going to happen in Mumbai.
Something that I
We'll
think the
create more
industry can
slums.
take up. With elections are up, the governments are changing, you
But
never know.
the only problem with that is that if extra FSI is given for residential development, rest assured developers won't create that EWS. Okay, there'll be high-end residential.
So,
Anuj, if I may add one quick point of what Mukesh's company and Mukesh has done very well is given it for fit outs post OC. I think that's another thing that we will grow towards because yes, the anchors, we have leased it to the anchors before. The anchors, their requirements can be taken care of well before. But once the OC is given, then what happens is that the vanilla brands, they order their merchandise very, very clearly. They know that which is the season that they need to order the merchandise for. So if you're looking at it more from a customer and a retail-centric view, I think that's a good initiative and a good step forward.
but I must put a caveat here. We've got sort of two Rolls-Royce developers here. I'm not so sure that all the developers would have the capability and the capacity to actually go ahead and build the full mall, get the OC, and then go out and lease it because you need the lease rental discounting to be done to fund the construction. I know both of your balance sheets are pretty decent, and you have the ability to do that. But I'm not so sure as a representation you should take that on board, given that it's a big stretch on the revenues. Rajat, I know there are a lot of the tier 2, tier 3 city developers who are here in this forum. What are the thoughts of retailers expanding in tier 2, tier 3?
Actually, we are quite excited about the small cities because there I think people also start for merchandise which is not available readily, and even for us we keep looking at the mix where we are and altering our designs. So that's become part of our DNA to look at the audience like malls do it. We do it ourselves as well. I'll give you an example. We are at the Delhi airport and they give us data as to what kind of people are coming or what profile of country are coming, and we started changing our product mix and our design basis that, and then the sales started increasing. So we get a lot of inquiries from cities like Raipur, even Dehradun, uh, Ranchi, all these areas, I think that they're looking for action, and we are very excited about this now there because.
So you continue to remain very bullish on tier 2, tier 3
absolutely,
towns.
absolutely. I think it's an interesting mix of people.
Yeah.
And they're looking for these things. So for them, it's all going to be new, and the newness is there, and there will be a lot of action.
And Shilpa, the definition of an ideal mall from a tier 1 to a tier 3 city, how would you differentiate that?
First word, scale. I think first word would be scale. I think that second word would be price, value. I think we are still a very, very value-driven country, and even in tier 1, you'll find a lot of segments which are essentially it's a value-driven shopper. I mean, there are very few catchments in the country which actually have space for premium and super premium centers. Bulk of it is still driven by the bottom end of the pyramid, and that's actually what keeps them all sustainable. The hypermarkets and all of that. And I'm not talking about their productivity and their rent to sale ratios, but it's what actually keeps the customers to keep coming back to the mall. So I think the scale would be very different when we move from tier 1 to tier 3 or tier 2. And the second thing is the presence of local retailers, which needs to be it needs to be increasing in percentage as we go forward. And more local retailers need to be brought into the fold of organized retail, and very often handheld, because that's what keeps the consumers feeling that, yes, I have been shopping in the XYZ store, and it's something which is now got integrated with the modern retail format. And the third thing is, as I said, value and price. The fourth and the extremely important is how you actually configure, I don't want to use the word design, but configure the shopping center in terms of amenities, services, scale, common atrium spaces versus your retail spaces, so that your common area maintenance charge is affordable for retailers in that market. Because you cannot actually be paying a 35, 40 rupee rental or a 50 rupee rental and pay 25 rupee CAM. So that is actually a very critical component. And wherever possible, where circumstances and the climate allows, it actually should now start to, we actually need as an industry to look at more green options and more options where air conditioning can be minimized, and there are large parts of the country where we can do that. We don't necessarily need to create glass boxes which are energy guzzlers. So I think these four aspects are quite critical. And of course, manpower is something that I think we'll need to train a lot of manpower going forward, and particularly in smaller cities, to come and create a larger pool for the industry in general.
Nimesh, Pushpa mentioned about manpower, and Mukesh and Shilpa have mentioned. Tell us, what's the role of technology going forward in these malls?
I represent parking, so I'll touch upon that a little bit. Manpower is going to be a challenge, may not be today, but it's going to be definitely in the future. We have some fantastic car park operators in this country who, this is a nascent industry, but they're growing extremely well and doing extremely well. But they still need the tools in terms of technology to be able to offer their customers a very convenient way to come into parking, park their cars, and still generate enough profitability, along with getting enough data from the customer to ensure that the mall is making use of this asset in the maximum possible way. But in doing so, we would try to ensure that the number of people which is required to do the same task would be significantly lower. And that is how we can help both the mall owners as well as the operators to ensure that overall manpower requirements do start tapering down, and more skilled labor is then utilized in these areas.
Let me add one more thing here. See, it's the people coming to the mall, they are from different parts of the society. Even if we have high-tech equipment, you still require manpower there. Today, even if you have escalator, you need to have a guard there because you've seen accidents taking place. You have a lift which says can take 8 people. But there are times you can see 10 people travel, you need a lift operator. I've also seen this in the parking. You have an automatic button, you can take out your own ticket, but there's a guy standing there to give you a ticket. So these are challenges what you have. I think over a period of time it's going to come down. So today, there are a lot of people dependent a lot on manpower, and trained manpower, in fact.
But I think,
agreed.
sorry, as
Sorry,
we
go
go
ahead.
forward, I think the generation that we are seeing today, and particularly the youth of this country, I think they are going to, technology is something that's going to come more easily to us as a consumer, and as whether it's on the mall management side or the consumer side. So if up until 5 years ago there were touch-sensitive screen mall directories not really being used, I think it's going to change quite dramatically, quite drastically, and much faster than we are going to be able to realize this. Also, another point, sorry, we were talking about tier 3. Basis our experience in creating and operating centers in both tier 1 and tier 3, we are operating a center in Siliguri and doing a center in Amritsar as well, and a couple of other tier 3 cities as well. One of the things which is quite critical as a mall developer or a creator is when we are creating a mix which is relevant to the consumer of that market, we need to, particularly so for tier 3, not even so much for tier 1, we need to add one step higher aspiration in terms of trade and tenant mix, just a notch. About 20% of tenants really need to give you that aspiration to be able to graduate or upgrade yourself. And that's actually what is the initial driver for them to leave or to transition from their existing core old traditional markets and high streets to the new modern retail shopping center that may have opened in their city. And that, I think, in our experience has worked quite well. In Siliguri, we introduced brands. When we took over the center, we started to gradually turn it around and upgrade it as far as we felt would be acceptable to the consumer. We brought in brands such as Body Shop. And to our surprise, the sales per square foot of the brand was almost as high as it was in Bangalore. So, that kind of said a lot about the market.
Yeah. And that is true, and maybe Pushpa can add on to it, because I can tell you invariably I hear, we want an Emporio in our mall. I think Emporio is more like a luxury word, and it's associated with, so I think Emporio, you should actually copyright that as a word, because every mall owner has that,
It's become the generic term for luxury.
It's become a generic term for luxury. That's right.
Right. So I, do think that it depends on the destination. It depends on the mall, really. In tier 3, yes, one notch higher, I do agree. But in tier 1 city, I think it's very important that we focus on having slightly shorter term leases, because the consumers are evolving. The consumers around that area is evolving. Let me take an example of where we are developing Mall of India, Noida. Today, there are 300,000 apartments that are getting built in and around that catchment. Obviously, the mall which is getting leased out today can be relevant for the next 3 years to 4 years. After 4 years, that consumer profile is bound to change. I think which is why leased malls make a lot of sense. And B, the fact that the leases should be 6 years in nature. And retailers also understand that. In fact, in Singapore, they have 3-year leases, and they think 3-year lease is a long-term lease. So I think eventually what will happen is that malls will evolve and reinvent itself every 5 to 6 years. And that is the beauty of the business, and that is what will give us better mall management techniques. That is what will give us an understanding, a better understanding of what consumer wants at every given phase of that mall, and keep it alive and kicking.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're making these comments at the shopping center forum and not the IRF. I think we guys would have been sort of thrown out.
I made that comment here because knowing that, we have one retailer and we do have a lot more developers here than retailers.
Right, yeah. No? But it's a very, very valid point, Shilpa. I think there's a lot in that statement that you've made for the developers sitting in here to understand and appreciate that 9 years out, the environment is going to change, the dynamics of that location is going to change, and hence the flexibility of the mall needs to be there to be able to cater to those changing environment. I'm going to take 5 minutes, Alok, with you and Joanna, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A to the floor. And the reason I'm going to take that 5 minutes is because, I don't think so one stakeholder of that industry is pretty much as much aligned as I would have wanted to it. And then for the right reasons, Alok and Joanna, it's not, it is what it is. But tell me, Alok, what needs to be done to get the investor aligned to the developer. And the reason I say is you cannot build these malls on debt. It cannot happen at 15, 18%. It cannot happen. Not everybody is a Reheja or a DLF, who've got that equity in their pocket to be able to put it on their own. It has to be you guys who will have to come in. And if you don't come in, I think in the previous session, Irfan mentioned, that is going to be the biggest trouble, because you are the guys who are going to come in with equity. And the expectation will be equity expectation, not a debt meter running on your head. And it does appear at this moment in time that the private equity is not that excited. Joanna is excited, but it's only 20%. You are perhaps minus 20%.
Actually, the discussion what we have here is, and again, there's a big disconnect between developers and investors. Developers want to lease mall after OC has been obtained. So how do it again take a hit on the return on the investments? And then, you want to have short-term leases. So again, how to take a loan or how to take a finance, or 3-year leases, how to take a finance, how do you amortize your fit-outs? So I think, again, what probably could work for a mall is not working for investors. The challenge here is, again, DLF mall, but I mean, for them, the land could be at some, at a 5-year, they could have bought it 5 years hence, and it probably will work for them. For investor which comes now, how that investment is going to work, I'm not sure. So I think those are the few challenges and which are creating a disconnect between developers and investors. But I think there are 3 things probably which can help actually. And also, most of the success stories what we're talking about, they are, if I'm not wrong, they are about grade A cities. I think grade B cities, grade C cities, they have a lot more challenges. And again, DLF, Infinity, leave them apart. Out of 100, these could be 5 success stories, but they don't need, probably they don't need investor money. So I think investor has to look at those 95, which again have more challenges. So I think there are 3 things probably which could help. And there are a lot of things which could help, but I think at least in financial world, I think these 3 things could help. One thing is if we could have, the bond market could open up in India, and where we can raise debt, where we don't have to pay principal, and we just pay interest. It could be a long-term, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years kind of a loan, where we just keep paying interest, and the quantum of debt also could go up, and that means investors can get exit faster, and also the cost of capital could come down. So if that market can mature in India, that would be of help. And of course, that market exists in Western world and developed countries. So I think that is one thing that probably could be of help. Second thing is, of course, if REITs come in after initial hiccups, it also provided, at least it will provide a, exit options to investors. So, I mean, whatever is a return, but at least exit options would be provided. And of course, we expect that REITs would have a cap much lower than at which the funds want to invest. So that also could push up valuations a bit, and that could be of some help. And also, I think it's important that government stops its flip-flop and permits retail in FDI in no uncertain terms, and all political class have to agree that they should stop doing politics on that and understand that it's very, very important for growth of retail in India in long term across geographies. So I think if these 3 things happen, it could help. And of course, and then investors and developers have to work it out, how to make other things, cost of land, but I don't think a lot can be done about that. But cost of land, cost of finance, those things we have to handle them. But I think these 3 things in financial world, that could be of some help. Yeah, so if the GDP grows, consumption will grow up. So of course, that's again an ongoing story, and that's it.
Joanna, what can we do? So 3 things that Alok said is, on the bond market, REIT market, and FDI in retail. What else can we do to get you excited to invest more than 20%?
I think the retail investor today needs to think long term. And unless you think long term, you can't make a retail investment into a shopping center. Today, any real estate fund, etc., would look at investing into residential, commercial, etc., getting out in 2 or 3 years' time. But retail has never shown those returns, and it doesn't look like it will show those returns in the long run. So unless you're a 6 to 10 year investor, and that's the kind of, that's the kind of timeline you're looking at investing your money into, it doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be a retail investor then. And I think any one of the, if FDI opens into retail as well as into retail investments, and foreign investment regulations change, all of the foreign investors and institutional investors who will come in will look at a long-term play. And that's what that's what conclusion we've come to. I completely agree with Alok on, on if REITs open up, wow, that's a great option. And, you'll have a whole influx of money coming in. I mean, everyone sitting around this table will be happy, certainly you, Anuj. And, yeah, I guess, that's pretty much.
Absolutely. No, that is very valid. It needs to be patient capital. I think there needs to be, when you compare it with residential, it's going to become difficult to have an argument why not invest in residential. So perhaps it's the different kind of capital that will seek retail real estate opportunities. So quite an engaging, interesting discussion. I'm going to open it up to the floor for any questions that you may have. And like before, if you can identify yourself, and if you've got any specific panelist in mind, please ask and direct that question to that specific panelist. I'm actually delighted to see a full house post-lunch on a shopping center. That shows a lot of encouragement to me that there are people who are still interested in shopping centers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Myself, Bhagirath. I am from Sri Balaji Agora Mall, Ahmedabad. Well, before lunch, I had a word with Anuj, I am sure. We were talking about top 5 mall 2030 in India. I think we can do that. And well, for me, hospitality, and then I went to cinema. Just recently came into retail, but just within 2 months, I think I like now more retail. Well, we were talking about challenge, the land, finance, e-commerce. I want to say about e-commerce that I think India, we have e-commerce started from last 2 years. That is like pushing. But UK or US, which are already developed, and they have e-commerce in the vein, the blood. But they don't have any problem. They have opened Westfield at the time of Olympic, which is I think the largest in one of the largest in world. So I don't think so e-commerce development will affect the shopping center in India. So we need to just, yes, we need to learn and play around with the e-commerce thing. My question is that, well, I wanted to ask to Ifan sir, but he's not there. So question was that when retailers comes in, but I think now I can ask to you, sir, that when retailers are coming in, we can do them with, okay, minimum guarantee plus profit sharing or revenue share. But still, if it doesn't work out, is there any things we all can work together, or we can have a kind of forum or a group that if somebody want to open a mall, okay, I'm a person, I have a land. Is it possible that we have a kind of group where all big developers join hand together? Okay, somebody has a land, somebody got a capital, rest join hand together and develop more. Retailers also invest something, or else, okay, let's just don't them invest, but at least they put their brand in, and then I think we can have a big mall. So, sir, I need a...
Yeah, and I'm going to let Pushpa respond to part of that. But very quickly, 3 things that I want to say is, you may have heard that song, the California Hotel. You come on your own wish, but you go on our own wish. So you've just got hitched into retail. So, welcome to get into this sector.
Thank you.
You've gone in from hospitality to retail. I think, you'll suffer along with us as you go on over the next few years. Second is don't use this word profit share. I don't know how you picked it up just in the
I
previous
was from
session.
Chroma.
I think it is a wrong word to be used. Don't take it out of this hall. I just fear that word coming and hounding me in a few weeks' time from retailers, saying is that, no revenue share, let's do profit share. Forget that. And the third is it's not MG plus profit plus revenue share. It's or. So you'll I think learn as you go. I'm not sure whether Pushpa wants to add anything more
Well,
to that.
I think I just wanted to add one small thing. That is, we in the brick and mortar malls business, we are not looking at e-commerce as competition. Yes, it will evolve. We can co-grow, and there are a lot of synergies that we can build further in. But as yet, e-commerce is not a threat. Yes, it's fast growing, and we are in discussions with most of the brands to see how we can sort of ensure that they don't have any large differential pricing strategy, which will then impact the brick and mortar business. But so far, it is growth alongside.
I completely
because the
second.
market share is growing for both.
I completely second you, but then before lunch, it was like e-commerce was a threat. So that's what I wanted to make it this point.
Can we take one question here on the front row?
Hi, good afternoon. Rehan from Mall of India. My question is to the panel. It's in two parts. One is that we have talked about a lot of inputs and factors which go into construction of a mall which are beyond the control of a developer. So what are the costs that can be curtailed in terms of yield on cost which can be maintained? Alok mentioned that the yield on cost is now coming down from 14 to 4%. So what are the factors that can be curtailed or jointly made an effort by the community of the developers to the government or whoever to curtail cost so that we can maintain a certain yield on cost? The other question is that we are moving towards a revenue share model, and eventually we all going to be on revenue share. So how does the private equity participation look at revenue share as the yield on cost? How does it figure out the returns on revenue share? Most developers at this point of time are budgeting as well on certain rent to revenue ratios and sales per square foot. Certain categories where there are certain revenue conversions on certain projections of sales. And that's how the budgeting is also being done for most developers of A grade. So what's the take of private equity on the same?
To answer your second question, the take of private equity on revenue share, I think one is that a shopping center investor will only take minimum guarantee as the base. I would have said that about 3 years ago. Having said that, over the last 10 years, we've got enough data, and any relevant shopping center investor will have that kind of data in terms of what categories of retailers make what category of, what type of revenue share. And I think shopping center developers today know the percentages of revenue share for each category that, where a retailer can survive with those kind of percentages. So as an investor today, what I would do is take my base at a minimum guarantee, or whatever that minimum guarantee is, and with all the data that I would have accumulated over the last 3 or 4 years in tier 1 versus tier 2 versus tier 3 cities, I would be able to assimilate at least a 75% accuracy on the kind of incremental amount that I could take, which is the percentage of revenue.
So in terms of a mall being more agile with shorter lease and a revenue share arrangement, aren't you contradicting in terms of your participation in retail?
Sorry?
In terms of the model moving towards a revenue share,
yes,
and going forward, as we all agree unanimously that is going to be a revenue share arrangement. I'm sure in terms of the mall being more agile and more flexible and having a higher upside, I think it should encourage more private equity participation rather than otherwise we're moving only towards debt. Then what's the point of having a private equity participation?
No, but to be honest, let me also say that at the end of the day, even if it's a shorter lease and if it's a 3-year lease and we are looking at a smaller, a churn more often, keeping in mind, a differential consumer, today if you know the Indian retail market and you have got your data correct, you can very well predict what is the kind of numbers that, that every individual retailer is going to be making. So if it's a 15% revenue share, you can predict what that 15% is, keeping in mind past data.
I think these are very, very intelligent questions. Both the questions that you've asked are absolutely spot on. I think in years to come, that is the way, it'll get valued. Exactly what Joanna said is, I don't think so any mall owner will sell his mall on minimum guarantee only. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. The investor is getting educated. Exactly what Joanna said is to say is, we want to reflect the revenue share as a price when we are buying the mall, irrespective of a shorter duration of lease. In fact, they prefer a shorter duration of lease. Exactly what Pushpa said is because it's an evolving market, new brands are coming, and they're happier with a shorter duration of lease. This wasn't the case a few years ago. A few years ago, they were only looking at minimum guarantee and they were looking at stability of the rent. I think they now differentiate between an office lease versus a retail mall lease.
Cost, the yield came down because it was not a under construction mall. It was a leased out mall. We bought a leased out mall 5 years back. Yield was 14%, and the new mall came up in a small city, and small city can just afford one mall, and people started moving from this mall to other mall, and half people in this mall and half people in other mall, and yields came down to 4%. It was not so much of a cost issue, but the capacity, how much the city can have for a retail space.
Thank you very much. I'm going to sort of wind up this panel. Interesting, starting from Alok on what the expectation of the private equity is. Not a good experience, but going forward, if the REIT market or the bond market or the FDI in retail opens up, there could be more excitement coming in from private equity. Mukesh, clearly feels that the infrastructure outside the mall, remains a challenge for many of the more successful malls. Joanna, a little bit more optimistic. 20% of her private, monies from the Bennett Group can go into retail, but certain caveats that are being put in place. But really, a patient capital is perhaps more required to come into retail. Clearly, Nimesh, from your perspective, I think interesting point that car parking should not only be looked at as a cost, but it's a business. It has a propensity to bring back income, bring back business intelligence on the customer, and given that that is an experience point getting in and out of the mall for a consumer. I think, Pushpa, several points that you made in terms of what's an ideal mall. Just quickly catching those. One is what's the catchment, what's the zoning that you're drawing up, and how you're bringing in the brands as a clear partnership for a long-term sustainable mall coming in. And equally, it's a great opportunity for the people to understand that perhaps today shorter leases are better than the longer leases. A few years ago, longer leases were better than what the shorter leases were. Rajat, you continue to remain optimistic about India and about tier 2, tier 3 cities, and there seems to be still a fair amount of momentum in those cities. Shilpa, good 5 or 6 points that you make. When I asked you that question is that what the mall developers don't listen to. I think you were quite diplomatic in the way that you responded, but great those 5 or 6 points. Including to ensure that many of the mall developers also bring their own reflection of personality when they're doing their malls, irrespective of what the mall really requires. And as I said, many want an emporio all the time because that is the life that they live, and without really respecting what the catchment is, that's the reflection that they would go in. And I think a very valid point that Shilpa made towards the end was really on the CAM, particularly in tier 2, tier 3 cities, when you go in there where the rentals are 50 or 60 rupees, and then you're looking at a CAM of 25 to 30 rupees, that just becomes very unaffordable for the retailer. So thank you very much for being patient with this panel, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Anuj Puri, Alok Agarwal, Joanna D'Souza, Mukesh Kumar, Nimish Sonawala, Pushpa Bector, Rajat Tuli, and Shilpa Malik. Could we once again please have a huge round of applause for all of them?
Bye. Tenants.